Some people seem to operate on a different level. They make clear decisions under pressure. They stay focused when others burn out. They execute consistently while everyone else relies on motivation and luck. And here's the uncomfortable truth. It's not talent. It's not willpower. And it's definitely not hustle. It's biology. Right now, your brain is either working with you or quietly sabotaging your performance. Most entrepreneurs don't fail because they lack ambition. They fail because they are running elite goals on an unoptimized brain. They flood themselves with dopamine through constant stimulation. They live with chronically elevated cortisol. They mistake anxiety for urgency and exhaustion for commitment. And then they wonder why focus feels fragile, why decision-making degrades, why momentum collapses under pressure. This video is about changing that permanently, because peak performance isn't mystical. It's neurochemical. The highest performers in business understand something most people never learn. Your ability to focus, plan, execute, and stay resilient is governed by a small set of chemical signals inside your brain. Dopamine, serotonin, cortisol, not as abstract science terms, but as levers. When these chemicals are unmanaged, you feel scattered, reactive, and inconsistent. When they are engineered correctly, you enter flow states more often, think strategically instead of emotionally, and sustain performance without burnout. This is not about motivation. Motivation is unreliable. This is about building a brain state that makes high performance the default. In this breakdown, we're going to unpack why hustle culture actually destroys long-term cognitive performance, how dopamine can either sharpen focus or fragment it completely, why serotonin is the hidden foundation of strategic thinking and emotional control, how cortisol, when controlled, becomes a weapon instead of a liability, and how elite performers design their environment to trigger peak states automatically. This is the psychology of peak performance, not as theory, but as a practical operating system for business in 2026 and beyond. If you want sharper focus without burnout, if you want consistency instead of emotional swings, if you want your brain working like an asset, not a liability, then pay attention. Because once you understand how your brain actually works, you stop forcing success and start engineering it. Chapter 1. The Brain's Business Blueprint. Why motivation is a dead end. Most people believe peak performance comes from motivation. They think if they could just feel more driven, more inspired, more energized, everything else would fall into place. That belief is not just wrong. It's destructive, because motivation is chemically unstable. The motivation myth. Motivation is a temporary emotional spike, usually driven by novelty or external pressure. That's why. It comes and goes. It spikes at the beginning and fades quickly. It fails under stress. Relying on motivation is like trying to power a business with lightning strikes. It looks impressive, but it's unusable. Peak performers don't wait to feel ready. They build brains that function regardless of mood. Your brain is not designed for modern business. Your brain evolved for survival, not spreadsheets. It prioritizes immediate rewards, threat detection, energy conservation. Modern business demands the opposite. Long-term thinking, delayed gratification, sustained focus. This mismatch creates internal resistance, not laziness. When people say they're unfocused, what they really mean is, my brain is responding exactly as it was designed to, just not for this environment. Neurochemistry drives behavior, not willpower. Every action you take is preceded by a chemical signal. Focus is not a choice, it's a state. Discipline is not character, it's chemistry. Consistency is not personality, it's regulation. Until you understand this, you'll keep blaming yourself for biological responses. Peak performers do the opposite. They stop asking, how do I push myself harder? And start asking, how do I create the brain conditions where focus is automatic? Why hustle culture fails neurologically. Hustle culture glorifies chronic stress, constant stimulation, sleep deprivation. Neurologically, this creates elevated cortisol, dopamine desensitization, reduced executive function. In other words, worse decisions, shorter attention spans, and emotional volatility. People call this grind. The brain calls it damage. The executive brain versus the reactive brain. There are two modes you operate in. The reactive brain seeks comfort, avoids discomfort, chases stimulation. The executive brain plans, delays gratification, makes strategic decisions. Peak performance lives in the executive brain, and it shuts down under stress. That's why smart people make bad decisions when overwhelmed. It's not a character flaw. It's a neurological state shift. The real competitive edge in 2026. Information is no longer scarce. Focus is. The entrepreneurs who win aren't smarter. They are regulated. They control their internal states. Design their days around brain function. Treat neurochemistry as infrastructure. This is the new advantage. Not more effort, not more ambition, better brain management. Reframing productivity entirely. Productivity isn't about squeezing more work out of yourself. It's about removing the friction between intention and execution. When your brain chemistry is aligned, focus feels natural. Action feels lighter. Recovery happens faster. That's not motivation. That's optimization. What this chapter sets up. From here forward, we stop talking about abstract ideas. We move into dopamine as a focus engine, serotonin as a stabilizer, cortisol as a controlled performance amplifier. You're no longer trying to force peak performance. You're learning how to build it into your brain. Chapter 2, Dopamine Drive. How elite performers fuel focus without burnout. Dopamine is not pleasure. That misunderstanding alone has ruined more attention spans, businesses, and careers than any lack of talent ever could. Dopamine is anticipation. It is the chemical that moves you toward action. When dopamine is calibrated correctly, you feel driven without anxiety, focused without force, motivated without burnout. When it's mismanaged, you feel restless, distracted, addicted to stimulation, unable to sustain deep work. This chapter is about mastering dopamine, not drowning in it. Why high dopamine does not mean high performance. Modern culture tells you dopamine equals success. More stimulation, more novelty, more excitement. Neurologically, that's backward. Excessive dopamine exposure raises the baseline. Once the baseline rises, normal tasks feel boring. Deep work feels unbearable. Progress feels slow. This is why people bounce between tabs, apps, ideas, and projects. Constantly busy, rarely effective. Peak performers don't chase dopamine spikes. They control the slope. Dopamine as a focus engine, not a reward toy. Dopamine evolved to help humans pursue long-term goals. The brain releases dopamine before the reward, not after. This means the promise of progress matters more than the payoff. Predictability sustains effort. Chaos destroys motivation. High performers structure work so dopamine supports consistent forward motion, not random hits of excitement. The micro-win architecture. Elite performers don't rely on massive victories. They design micro-wins. Clear start points. Defined endpoints. Visible progress. Each completed unit reinforces action, not because it feels amazing, but because it keeps dopamine stable and directional. This is why checklists work. This is why progress bars work. This is why finishing matters more than perfecting. Why constant novelty kills deep work. Social media, email, notifications, and multitasking flood the brain with cheap dopamine. Over time, the brain adapts. Deep work, which releases dopamine slowly, feels intolerable. This isn't weakness. It's neuroadaptation. Peak performers reverse this by intentionally reducing novelty. They make boring work tolerable again by lowering stimulation elsewhere. Dopamine fasting, reclaiming sensitivity. A dopamine fast is not punishment. It's recalibration. By reducing endless scrolling, background noise, constant switching, the brain regains sensitivity. Tasks regain weight. Focus returns. Drive becomes internal again. This is not asceticism. It's strategic restraint. Pre-commitment. Outsmarting the brain. Your future brain will not feel like your current brain. Peak performers know this. They pre-commit. Fixed work blocks. Non-negotiable starts. Limited options. This removes negotiation. And negotiation is where dopamine leaks away. Structure preserves motivation. The dopamine delay advantage. High performers delay rewards on purpose. Not indefinitely. Strategically. Work first. Reward later. This strengthens the brain's ability to associate effort with satisfaction. Over time, focus becomes self-reinforcing. This is why disciplined people appear naturally motivated. They train the chemistry. The dark side of achievement addiction. Unchecked dopamine doesn't just cause distraction. It causes achievement addiction, inability to rest, emotional volatility, constant dissatisfaction. Peak performance requires contentment alongside drive. This balance prevents burnout and keeps execution sustainable. Designing dopamine-smart environments. Your environment controls dopamine more than willpower ever will. High performers. Remove temptation. Reduce visual clutter. Create single-purpose workspaces. They don't rely on self-control. They reduce the need for it. Dopamine as a long-term asset. When dopamine is respected, focus lasts longer. Work feels lighter. Progress accelerates. When it's abused, attention fragments. Motivation collapses. Burnout becomes inevitable. This chapter teaches you how to turn dopamine into a precision tool, not a liability. Chapter 3. Serotonin Stability. The hidden foundation of strategic thinking. Most people think serotonin is about mood. That misunderstanding costs them clarity, patience, and long-term judgment. Serotonin is not happiness. Serotonin is psychological stability. It governs emotional regulation, impulse control, confidence under pressure, long-term planning ability. Without serotonin stability, dopamine-driven focus eventually collapses into anxiety, overreaction, or burnout. This chapter is about building a calm, unshakable mental base. Why smart people make irrational decisions. Under stress, the brain prioritizes speed over wisdom. Low serotonin reduces the brain's ability to delay gratification, consider consequences, regulate emotional responses. This is why intelligent entrepreneurs lash out under pressure, make impulsive decisions, abandon sound strategies during uncertainty. It's not a flaw in thinking. It's a chemical imbalance. Serotonin and executive function. Serotonin supports the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for strategy, ethics, planning, emotional control. When serotonin is depleted, thinking becomes reactive, risk assessment weakens, confidence erodes. High performers protect serotonin like infrastructure. Confidence is a chemical state. Confidence is not bravado. It's the nervous system saying, I can handle this. Serotonin regulates social composure, assertiveness without aggression, calm authority. This is why calm people command rooms. Not because they speak louder, but because their nervous system is stable. The modern serotonin crisis. Modern life silently depletes serotonin through chronic stress, poor sleep, inconsistent routines, isolation, constant comparison. People feel off and try to fix it with motivation. That never works. Stability must be rebuilt biologically. Nutritional anchors for mental stability. Serotonin synthesis depends on tryptophan availability, blood sugar stability, Gut health. This is why chaotic eating patterns lead to chaotic thinking. High performers treat nutrition as cognitive maintenance, not aesthetics. Sleep, the serotonin multiplier. Sleep is not rest. It's chemical restoration. Without sufficient sleep, serotonin receptors downregulate. Emotional reactivity increases. Focus becomes fragile. Peak performers protect sleep as aggressively as meetings. Nature and neural reset. Exposure to natural environments. Lowers cortisol. Increases serotonin availability. Restores attentional control. This isn't lifestyle fluff. It's neurobiology. Even brief exposure recalibrates the nervous system. Social stability and psychological safety. Serotonin is deeply social. Healthy connection signal. Safety, belonging, stability. Isolation increases threat perception. Peak performers choose fewer, deeper relationships over constant networking. Mindfulness without mysticism. Mindfulness isn't spiritual. It's attentional training. Slow breathing and present moment awareness. Reduce limbic reactivity. Increase prefrontal control. Stabilize serotonin signaling. This is why calm looks effortless in experienced leaders. The strategic advantage of emotional control. When emotions are regulated, decisions improve. Conflict de-escalates. Long-term thinking dominates short-term impulses. This is the quiet edge elite performers possess. Integrating stability with drive. Dopamine creates movement. Serotonin creates direction. Together, focus sharpens. Stress decreases. Confidence stabilizes. This is how peak performance becomes repeatable. Chapter 4. Cortisol Control. How elite performers use stress without breaking. Cortisol has a bad reputation. People blame it for burnout, anxiety, fatigue, and mental collapse. But cortisol is not a villain. Cortisol is a performance hormone. In the right dose at the right time, cortisol sharpens focus, increases energy availability, accelerates reaction speed, improves short-term memory. Elite performers don't eliminate stress. They engineer it. The Goldilocks zone of stress. Peak performance lives in the middle. Too little cortisol. Apathy. Low urgency. Lack of drive. Too much cortisol. Tunnel vision. Emotional reactivity. Cognitive rigidity. Burnout. High performers learn how to enter and exit stress deliberately. Why chronic stress destroys judgment. Acute stress sharpens. Chronic stress degrades. When cortisol stays elevated, the prefrontal cortex weakens. Emotional control declines. Risk-taking increases. Long-term planning collapses. People don't lose discipline. Their executive brain goes offline. Pressure versus threat. The perception shift. The brain responds differently to pressure, challenge you can handle. Threat, danger you feel overwhelmed by. Same workload, different chemistry. Elite performers reframe stressors as challenges, not threats. This shifts cortisol from destructive to productive. Eustress, productive stress. Eustress is short, intense, and purposeful. It activates focus, increases drive, enhances learning. Examples: timed work blocks, controlled deadlines, high-stakes sprints. Peak performers schedule stress. They don't live inside it. The cost of constant urgency. Always-on urgency trains the brain to stay in survival mode. Symptoms include irritability, sleep disruption, impulsive decisions, reduced creativity. Elite performers separate. Execution time, recovery time. Both are non-negotiable. Recovery is a skill. Recovery is not laziness. It's neurochemical repair. Cortisol must come down for memory consolidation, emotional regulation, dopamine sensitivity restoration. High performers build recovery into the system. Post-stress reset rituals. After intense work, elite performers move their bodies, change environments, slow breathing deliberately, This signals safety to the nervous system. Without this signal, cortisol lingers. Sleep is cortisol regulator. Sleep is the master switch. Poor sleep raises baseline cortisol, reduces stress tolerance, amplifies emotional reactions. This is why exhausted people feel on edge all day. Peak performers protect sleep ruthlessly. The cortisol feedback loop. High cortisol reduces sleep quality. Poor sleep increases cortisol. Without intervention, this loop destroys performance. Elite performers break it early, building stress resilience over time. Stress tolerance can be trained through controlled exposure, physical conditioning, predictable routines. This increases the brain's ability to handle pressure without panic. Calm under fire is learned. People admire composure, but composure is not personality. It's cortisol regulation. The calmest leaders are not emotionless. They are chemically disciplined, integrating stress into peak performance. Dopamine drives action. Serotonin stabilizes emotion. Cortisol sharpens execution. When balanced, focus intensifies. Decisions improve. Performance peaks. When mismanaged, everything collapses. Chapter 5. The Neuro-Optimized Environment. Designing life for automatic peak performance. Most people try to change their behavior. Elite performers change their surroundings. This is the hidden difference between those who struggle with consistency and those who seem effortlessly focused. Your brain responds far more to cues than to intentions. If the environment is wrong, discipline will fail every time. Why willpower is a terrible strategy. Willpower is finite, emotion-dependent, easily depleted. Relying on it is like building a business on enthusiasm alone. Peak performers know, if focus requires effort, something is broken. The cue, response, reward loop. Every habit begins with a cue. Your brain scans the environment constantly for visual signals, sound, location, time-based patterns. These cues trigger behavior before conscious thought. This is not weakness. This is how the brain conserves energy. Environment beats motivation. Motivation fluctuates. Environment persists. That's why elite performers work in predictable locations. Use the same tools. Follow structured schedules. Consistency reduces cognitive load. Less thinking, more executing. Single-purpose spaces create single-purpose focus. When one space serves multiple functions, the brain becomes confused. Peak performers separate work from rest, separate creation from consumption, separate thinking from reacting. The brain performs best when it knows exactly what mode it's in. Visual noise is cognitive noise. Clutter is not neutral. It competes for attention, increases mental fatigue, triggers unfinished task anxiety. High performers minimize visual input to preserve mental bandwidth. Technology as a neurochemical weapon. Your devices are not tools. They're dopamine delivery systems. Elite performers silence non-essential notifications. Batch communication. Control access windows. They decide when stimulation enters the brain. Friction is a feature, not a bug. Peak performers add friction to bad habits. Log out of apps. Remove shortcuts. Increase steps between impulse and action. And remove friction from good ones. Pre-open work tools. Prepare tasks in advance. Automate routine decisions. Behavior follows the path of least resistance. Time as an environmental cue. Time itself becomes a trigger. Consistent schedules teach the brain when to focus, when to rest, when to execute. This reduces negotiation, the enemy of action. The power of ritual over mood. Rituals bypass emotion. You don't ask how you feel. You follow the sequence. This is how elite performers stay consistent even on bad days. Designing for recovery, not just output. A high-performance environment includes rest signals, transition zones, low-stimulation spaces. Without recovery cues, burnout becomes inevitable. Identity is reinforced through environment. Your environment tells you who you are. Messy space, scattered identity. Structured space, focused identity. Elite performers live inside environments that reflect the person they are becoming. Automation, removing human error. The best systems assume you'll fail, so they automate savings. Schedule workouts, pre-plan decisions. This is humility, not weakness. Environment as a silent partner. Once designed correctly, focus becomes default. Distraction feels uncomfortable. Progress accelerates. This is when discipline becomes almost irrelevant. Chapter 6. Integrated Peak Performance. Building a brain that wins every day. Most people collect ideas. Elite performers build systems. They don't rely on one habit, one chemical, or one routine. They create an ecosystem where everything reinforces everything else. Peak performance is not a moment. It is a state you return to consistently. This chapter shows how. Why isolated optimization fails. Optimizing one area while ignoring the others creates imbalance. Dopamine without serotonin, anxiety. Cortisol without recovery, burnout. Focus without environment, inconsistency. This is why productivity advice feels powerful, then collapses. Peak performers integrate the daily neurochemical rhythm. Your brain follows a rhythm whether you manage it or not. Elite performers design their day to match chemistry. Morning, dopamine activation for momentum. Midday, serotonin stability for judgment. Afternoon, controlled cortisol for execution. Evening, downregulation for recovery. They don't fight biology. They ride it. The morning prime, setting the chemical tone. The first hour determines the day. Peak performers avoid immediate stimulation, reactive communication, chaotic input. Instead, they create predictable routines, early micro-wins, clear priorities. This stabilizes dopamine early, preventing distraction later. Deep work as a chemical event. Deep work is not about time. It's about state. Elite performers enter deep work with intention. Remove all novelty. Work in fixed blocks. They don't force focus. They create conditions where focus emerges naturally. Transition rituals, protecting mental energy. Most people burn out during transitions. Switching tasks without closure spikes cortisol. Elite performers use rituals, short walks, breathing resets, physical movement. This clears residue and preserves mental clarity. Decision hygiene, reducing cognitive drain. Every decision costs chemistry. High performers pre-decide routines, automate low-value choices, reserve thinking for leverage points. This protects executive function for what matters. Stress as a scheduled tool. Stress is not avoided. It's scheduled. Elite performers use sprints, create artificial deadlines, push hard briefly, then they recover deliberately. This keeps cortisol sharp, not corrosive. Recovery is part of the system. Recovery is not optional. Without it, dopamine sensitivity drops. Serotonin destabilizes. Cortisol lingers. High performers treat recovery as performance work, not leisure. Sleep as system reset. Sleep is where chemistry resets. Memory consolidates. Emotional balance restores. Elite performers protect sleep with consistent timing, reduced evening stimulation, wind-down rituals. They don't negotiate with sleep. Weekly calibration. Peak performers don't wait for burnout signals. They review weekly. Focus quality, energy trends, emotional stability. They adjust before collapse. This is how momentum compounds. Identity lock-in. Eventually, the system reshapes identity. You stop trying to be disciplined. You stop forcing focus. You stop chasing motivation. You become the kind of person whose brain expects excellence. This is the quiet power of integration. Why this system scales. This approach survives bad days, handles pressure, adapts to growth, because it's not built on emotion. It's built on biology and structure. Peak performance becomes predictable. At this stage, focus is repeatable, energy is managed, decisions are cleaner, stress is contained, success stops feeling chaotic. It becomes engineered, closing the loop. Peak performance isn't about being intense. It's about being regulated, deliberate, and consistent. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And now, your system is built. Chapter 7. The Daily Performance Protocol. How elite operators execute without relying on mood. Most people fail not because they lack knowledge. They fail because their system collapses the moment. They wake up tired. Something goes wrong. Motivation dips. Stress spikes. Elite performers don't ask, "Do I feel like performing today?" They operate from protocol, not emotion. This chapter is about turning everything you've learned into a repeatable daily operating system. Why mood-based living destroys consistency. Mood is unstable. Circumstances fluctuate. Energy varies. If performance depends on how you feel, results will always be inconsistent. Peak performers remove emotion from the equation. They don't wait for clarity. They follow predefined sequences. The power of non-negotiables. Elite performers anchor their day with non-negotiables. These are not goals. They are defaults. Examples: fixed wake-up window, first work block before consumption, daily movement, evening shutdown ritual. Non-negotiables eliminate internal debate, and debate is where discipline dies. The morning execution lock. The morning is not for creativity. It's for momentum. High performers avoid decision-heavy tasks. Avoid input overload. Avoid reactive communication. Instead, they execute something predetermined. This locks dopamine into motion early, making distraction less tempting later. The one hard thing rule. Every elite performer has a daily anchor task. One thing that requires focus, creates leverage, moves the needle. They do it early, not because it feels good, but because it removes psychological drag for the rest of the day. Time blocking as cognitive protection. Time blocking is not productivity theater. It's brain defense. By assigning tasks to time, context switching decreases. Cortisol stabilizes. Focus deepens. Elite performers protect time blocks like assets. Execution windows, not endless work. Peak performers don't work endlessly. They work in windows. Start time, end time, clear objective. This creates urgency without burnout. The brain performs best when it knows the finish line exists. Decision elimination strategy. Every unnecessary decision drains chemistry. Elite performers eliminate outfit decisions, meal decisions, tool decisions, workflow decisions. This preserves mental energy for strategy and execution. The midday reset. Performance decays without recalibration. High performers use a midday reset. Short walk, breathing regulation, mental check-in. This prevents the slow cognitive drift that ruins afternoons. Protecting the second half of the day. Most people lose the day afternoon. Elite performers schedule lighter tasks post-peak. Avoid novelty traps. Reduce stimulation. They don't expect infinite focus. They manage decline intelligently. The evening shutdown ritual. Without closure, the brain never rests. Elite performers shut down deliberately. Review what was done. Set tomorrow's priorities. Close open loops. This lowers cortisol and improves sleep quality. Bad days don't break the system. The system is built for failure days. On bad days, minimums still apply. Non-negotiables remain. Momentum is preserved. This prevents the all-or-nothing collapse most people experience. Consistency beats intensity. Elite performers are not intense every day. They are consistent every day. And consistency compounds faster than occasional brilliance. the identity shift. Eventually, execution stops feeling forced. You don't ask, should I do this? You ask, what's next in the protocol? That's when discipline disappears, replaced by structure. Why this chapter matters. This is where peak performance becomes reliable, sustainable, scalable. You're no longer managing willpower. You're running a system. Chapter 9. Internal sabotage. Mastering ego, bias, and the invisible forces that derail peak performance. You don't usually fail because you lack knowledge. You fail because of unexamined patterns. The most dangerous obstacles to peak performance are not external, not competition, not workload, not lack of opportunity. They live inside perception, identity, and ego. This chapter exposes them and shows you how elite performers neutralize them. Why smart people self-sabotage. Intelligence doesn't protect you from bias. In fact, it often makes it worse. Smart people rationalize bad decisions, defend flawed strategies, confuse confidence with correctness. Elite performers are not smarter. They are more honest with themselves. Ego is a defensive system, not a villain. Ego isn't arrogance. Ego is protection. It exists to preserve identity, avoid psychological pain, maintain self-image. The problem arises when ego blocks feedback. Peak performers don't destroy ego. They manage it. The comfort of being right. Being right feels safe, but safety kills growth. Elite performers willingly enter environments where their assumptions are challenged, their blind spots are exposed, their competence is stretched. Discomfort becomes a signal, not a threat. Confirmation bias, the silent performance killer. The brain prefers familiar beliefs. Confirmation bias filters information, reinforces comfort, blocks adaptation. This is why people double down on failing strategies. Elite performers actively seek disconfirming evidence, identity attachment, and performance plateaus. When performance becomes identity, mistakes feel personal, feedback feels threatening, growth feels risky. Elite performers separate who they are from what they do. This psychological distance preserves adaptability. Fear of regression. Many high performers secretly fear, if I slow down, I'll lose everything. This fear drives overwork, control obsession, inability to rest. Peak performers trust systems, not panic. The hidden cost of comparison. Comparison distorts self-assessment. It triggers envy, inflates or deflates confidence, warps decision-making. Elite performers compare only against their own standards, their long-term trajectory. External comparison is informational, never emotional. Perfectionism as avoidance. Perfectionism often hides fear. Fear of judgment, failure, exposure. Elite performers value iteration over perfection. Progress beats polish. Emotional blind spots under pressure. Under stress, unexamined emotions surface. Irritation, defensiveness, impatience. Elite performers track emotional patterns, not to suppress them, but to understand them. Feedback without collapse. Most people either reject feedback or internalize it destructively. Elite performers extract signal and discard noise. They don't argue with feedback. They analyze it, building self-awareness as a performance skill. Self-awareness is not introspection. It's pattern recognition. Elite performers notice when execution slips, when ego tightens, when rationalizations appear. This awareness prevents small issues from compounding. The discipline of psychological honesty. Honesty with oneself is uncomfortable, but it prevents catastrophic failure. Elite performers ask, what am I avoiding? What story am I telling myself? What would I do if ego weren't involved? Neutralizing self-sabotage. Self-sabotage loses power when patterns are named, triggers are recognized, systems compensate. This transforms weakness into strategy. Chapter 10. The Permanent Advantage. How elite performers lock peak performance for life. Peak performance is easy to access briefly. What's rare is keeping it. Most people improve temporarily, perform intensely, then slowly decay. Not because they fail, but because they stop maintaining the system. Elite performers think differently. They don't chase peaks. They build floors. The difference between peaks and floors. A peak is what you can reach on your best day. A floor is the minimum you perform on your worst. Elite performers raise their floor relentlessly. Even on bad days, focus exists. Structure remains. Execution happens. This is the real advantage. Systems that survive life changes. Careers change. Energy changes. Responsibilities increase. Systems built on intensity collapse. Systems built on structure and adaptability endure. Elite performers design systems that scale up, scale down, absorb disruption. They expect life to interfere. The rule of sustainable excellence. Anything that requires constant motivation is unstable. Peak performers optimize for low friction, high leverage, minimal maintenance. If it's hard to maintain, it won't last. Annual recalibration. Elite performers don't wait for crisis. They recalibrate yearly. Goals, systems, identity. This prevents drift and misalignment. Identity as the final lock. Eventually, performance becomes identity. Not ego identity, operational identity. I am someone who executes. I am someone who adapts. I am someone who maintains standards. Behavior follows identity automatically. Environment as a long-term ally. Your environment evolves with you. Elite performers update. Tools, spaces, inputs. They remove outdated cues that trigger old behaviors. Mentorship and external mirrors. No one sustains excellence alone. Elite performers maintain advisors, mentors, honest peers. External mirrors prevent blind spots. The compounding effect of standards. Standards compound faster than habits. Each decision reinforces what you tolerate, what you accept, what you allow. Elite performers hold standards even when no one is watching. Avoiding the arrival trap. There is no finish line. The moment you think you've arrived, decay begins. Elite performers remain students, curious, humble, alert. Legacy thinking. Elite performers think beyond output. They think in terms of impact, continuity, example. This shifts motivation from ego to responsibility. When performance feels effortless. At the highest level, discipline feels light. Focus feels natural. Systems run quietly. This is not luck. It's engineering. The final integration. Dopamine drives. Serotonin stabilizes. Cortisol sharpens. Environment supports. Systems integrate. Ego is managed. Adaptation continues. This is not hustle. This is mastery. The final truth. Peak performance isn't about doing more. It's about becoming someone for whom excellence is normal. Once that happens, success stops feeling dramatic. It becomes predictable. Closing. You don't need more motivation. You don't need more hacks. You don't need more intensity. You need systems that work even when you don't feel like it. Build those, and performance becomes permanent.